The creditor's fist came down on the weathered wooden counter hard enough to rattle the tin cups hanging from their hooks, and Tabitha Hayes felt her heart drop straight through the floorboards of her late father's mercantile. Vernon Crabtree stood before her with his ledger open to a page that might as well have been her death warrant, his fingers tapping impatiently against numbers that had grown impossibly large during the 6 months since her father had been laid to rest in the Wilson, Kansas cemetery. "Miss Hayes, I have been more than patient," Vernon said, his voice carrying the particular coldness of a man who measured human worth in dollar signs. "Your father borrowed $500 to keep this establishment running, and the interest has compounded. You now owe me $732, and I will have my payment today." Tabitha's hands trembled as she gripped the counter's edge. At 22 years old, she had inherited not just her father's general store but also his crushing debts. The drought of 1883 had devastated the Kansas plains, driving away customers and leaving the shelves half empty. She had sold nearly everything of value: the silver candlesticks her mother had brought from Ohio, her grandmother's wedding ring, even the good horses, keeping only the aging mare that could barely pull the delivery wagon. "Mr. Crabtree, please," she said, hating how her voice wavered. "I have $47. It is everything I have managed to save this month. Take it as a payment, and I promise I will have more next month. The harvest season is coming and people will need supplies." Vernon's laugh was sharp and humorless. $47. That will not even cover this month's interest. He closed the ledger with a decisive snap. "I have been generous long enough. If you cannot pay in full by sunset, I will take payment another way." The way his eyes traveled down her body made Tabitha's skin crawl. She understood his meaning perfectly, had seen it coming in the increasingly frequent visits, the way he always found excuses to stand too close, to let his hand linger when passing her papers to sign. "There must be another way," she said, stepping back until her shoulders hit the shelves behind her. "Give me 2 more weeks. I will find the money somehow." 2 weeks? Vernon moved around the counter, backing her further into the corner. "I think not. You are a young woman alone in the world, Miss Hayes, with no prospects and no protector. You should be grateful that a man of my standing is willing to overlook your financial failures in exchange for certain considerations." The bell above the door chimed, and both of them turned to see a tall figure silhouetted against the bright afternoon sun. The man who stepped inside had to duck slightly beneath the doorframe, his broad shoulders filling the space as he removed his dusty hat. His hair was dark as a crow's wing, his eyes the color of storm clouds, and he moved with the easy confidence of someone who had faced down danger and lived to tell about it. "The lady said no," the stranger said, his voice carrying a quiet authority that made Vernon take an involuntary step backward. "Seems pretty clear to me." "This is a private business matter," Vernon said, drawing himself up to his full height, though he still stood several inches shorter than the newcomer. "I suggest you move along, Cowboy." The stranger's gaze never left Vernon's face. "Name is Kane Young. I am looking for supplies, and this appears to be a general store. That makes it my business to be here." He paused, letting the silence stretch just long enough to make Vernon uncomfortable. "Unless you were leaving." Tabitha watched the exchange with her heart hammering against her ribs. She had never seen this man before, was certain she would have remembered someone who commanded a room simply by entering it. He wore the practical clothing of a working ranch hand, denim trousers and a worn leather vest over a sun-faded blue shirt, but something in the way he carried himself suggested he was more than just another drifter passing through Wilson. Vernon's face had gone red. "This does not concern you." Miss Hayes owes me a substantial sum, and I intend to collect." "How much?" Kane asked. $732, Vernon said with visible satisfaction. "More money than a girl like her could earn in years of honest work." Kane reached into his vest pocket and withdrew a leather money fold. Tabitha watched in disbelief as he counted out bills with practiced ease, laying them on the counter one by one. "$750, he said. "That covers the debt plus a little extra for your trouble. Now get out." Vernon's mouth opened and closed like a landed fish. "You cannot simply walk in here and pay another person's debts. What possible interest could you have in this matter?" "I just developed an interest in keeping scum like you from taking advantage of decent people," Kane said, his voice dropping to a dangerous quiet. "You have your money. I suggest you take it and leave before I decide I would rather spend that $750 on your funeral expenses." For a moment, Tabitha thought Vernon might argue, might try to assert some claim of prior arrangement, but something in Kane's eyes must have convinced him otherwise. He snatched the money from the counter, stuffing it into his coat pocket with shaking hands. "This is not over," Vernon said, directing his words at Tabitha. "You think this cowboy will protect you forever. He will move on, and when he does, you will still be alone and vulnerable. Remember that." Kane took a single step forward, and Vernon practically ran for the door, the bell chiming frantically as he disappeared into the street. The silence that followed felt enormous, broken only by the ticking of the wall clock and Tabitha's ragged breathing. "Why did you do that?" she asked finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "You do not even know me." Kane turned to face her, and she found herself caught by the intensity of his gaze. Up close, she could see the sun-weathered lines at the corners of his eyes, the small scar that cut through his left eyebrow, the shadow of stubble along his jaw. He looked to be perhaps 27 or 28, old enough to have lived through hard times and young enough to still carry idealism in the set of his shoulders. "My mother was widowed when I was 12, he said. "Man came around trying to collect on debts my father had left. Said she could pay with money or pay another way. She did not have the money." He placed his hat on the counter, running a hand through his hair. "I was too young to stop him then. I am not too young anymore." Tabitha felt tears burning at the corners of her eyes. "I cannot possibly repay you." "I do not have $700. I barely have $7. "I did not do it for repayment," Kane said. "I did it because it was the right thing to do." "No one does something for nothing," Tabitha said, suspicion warring with gratitude in her chest. She had learned that lesson too well in the months since her father's death. "What do you want from me?" Kane's expression softened. "You said you need supplies. I am the new foreman at the Three Rivers Ranch about 5 miles north of town. We have 30 hands and a kitchen that goes through provisions like locusts through a wheat field. I came to town to establish an account with a local supplier. If you want to repay me, you can do it by keeping us stocked and running deliveries twice a month. At fair prices, of course." Tabitha's mind raced, calculating the possibilities. The Three Rivers Ranch was one of the largest operations in the county, having survived the drought by virtue of access to underground springs that kept their cattle watered when other ranches were selling off their herds at devastating losses. A contract to supply them could save the mercantile, could give her a real chance at building back what her father had lost. "That would be agreeable," she said carefully. "But that kind of business might bring in $200 over the course of a year, maybe $300 if the ranch has a good season. You just paid more than twice that amount." "Then I suppose you will owe me for a few years," Kane said, and for the first time she saw the hint of a smile touch his lips. "I can live with that arrangement." He extended his hand, and after a moment's hesitation, Tabitha took it. His palm was calloused from years of hard work, his grip firm but gentle. Something passed between them at that contact, a spark of recognition that neither of them could quite name but both of them felt. "Tabitha Hayes," she said. "Pleased to make your acquaintance, Miss Hayes," Kane replied. "Now, about those supplies. I have a list as long as your arm and a wagon waiting outside." They spent the next hour going through Kane's requirements, and Tabitha felt something loosening in her chest as she moved through the familiar routine of measuring flour and coffee, counting tins of peaches and bags of beans. Kane proved to be easy to talk to, asking intelligent questions about quality and availability, listening when she explained which items she would need to order from the warehouse in Abilene and which she could provide immediately. "The ranch cook is particular about his baking powder," Kane said, watching as Tabitha climbed a ladder to reach the top shelf. "Says most of what you buy in town is cut with plaster dust." "Mr. Chen is right to be careful," Tabitha said, passing down a tin with a label she recognized. "This brand comes straight from Chicago. My father started carrying it 5 years ago when the local supplier was caught doing exactly what Mr. Chen suspected." Kane caught the tin with one hand. "You know our cook?" "Everyone in Wilson knows Mr. Chen," Tabitha said, climbing down with another tin tucked under her arm. "He used to work on the railroad before the line was completed. When the construction moved on, he stayed. My father gave him credit when no one else would, let him buy supplies for the small restaurant he tried to start. It did not work out, but Mr. Chen always said he would repay the kindness someday." "He talks about your father sometimes," Kane said. "Says Robert Hayes was one of the few honest men he met in Kansas." The mention of her father brought a lump to Tabitha's throat. "He tried to be. In the end, it did not save him. The drought, the failed crops, the customers who could not pay their bills because they had no money themselves. He worked himself to exhaustion trying to keep everyone afloat, and when the fever came through last winter, he did not have the strength left to fight it." "I am sorry," Kane said, and the simple sincerity in his voice made her believe he truly meant it. They loaded the supplies into Kane's wagon as the afternoon sun began its descent toward the horizon. Tabitha found herself watching the way Kane moved, the effortless strength with which he lifted 50-pound sacks of grain, the care he took to secure everything properly so nothing would shift during the journey back to the ranch. "I will return in 2 weeks with payment and a new order," Kane said as he prepared to leave. "If you need anything in the meantime, if that Crabtree fellow gives you any trouble, send word to 3 Rivers. Someone will come." "Thank you," Tabitha said, "for everything. I still do not entirely understand why you helped me, but I am grateful." Kane climbed up onto the wagon seat, gathering the reins. "Maybe I will figure out how to explain it by the time I see you again. Until then, Miss Hayes." She watched him drive away, the wagon wheels leaving tracks in the dusty street, and realized she was already counting the days until his return. The 2 weeks that followed were the busiest Tabitha had experienced since before her father's illness. Word spread quickly through Wilson that the mercantile had secured the 3 Rivers account, and other customers began returning, small ranchers and farmers who had been taking their limited business to the larger store on the far side of town. Tabitha suspected that Kane had said something to people, had quietly spread the word that Robert Hayes's daughter was working hard to honor her father's legacy and deserved support. She threw herself into the work, rising before dawn to sweep the floors and dust the shelves, staying up late by lamplight to update the account books and plan her inventory orders. The mercantile began to feel alive again, the way it had when her father was healthy and the town was prosperous. She hired Tommy Porter, a 16-year-old boy whose family had lost their farm to the bank, to help with the heavy lifting and deliveries to customers within town. But at night, alone in the small room behind the store that served as her living quarters, Tabitha found her thoughts drifting to Kane Young. She knew it was foolish to build fantasies around a man she had met only once, a man who had shown her simple human kindness and nothing more. Yet she could not stop herself from wondering about him, from imagining what his life was like at Three Rivers Ranch, whether he thought about her at all during the long days between their meetings. When Kane's wagon appeared outside the mercantile exactly 14 days after their first encounter, Tabitha's heart performed an embarrassing leap in her chest. She was serving Mrs. Patterson, the minister's wife, and had to force herself to focus on measuring out the requested amount of ribbon rather than rushing to the door like an eager child. Kane waited patiently, nodding politely to Mrs. Patterson when she finally completed her purchase and left with numerous backward glances at the tall foreman. When the door closed behind her, Kane allowed himself a genuine smile. "Word around town is that business is picking up," he said. "Thanks to you," Tabitha replied. "I know what you did, spreading word about the mercantile. You did not have to do that." "I did not do anything except mention to a few people that Robert Hayes's daughter runs a fair establishment with good prices and quality goods," Kane said. "The rest was your doing. Mr. Chen says the supplies we got last time were exactly right. Not a single complaint. He sent me with a list that is even longer this time." They fell into an easy routine, Kane reading items from his list, while Tabitha gathered them from around the store. She had anticipated some of his needs based on the previous order and had everything organized for quick access. Kane noticed, commenting on her efficiency with obvious approval. "You have a head for this kind of work," he said as she calculated the total. "Your father trained you well." "I grew up in this store," Tabitha said. "I could count inventory before I could read properly. My father used to say I was better at managing stock than he ever was." "What about the debt?" Kane asked, his voice carefully neutral. "Crabtree has not been back, not once," Tabitha said. "Though I see him sometimes when I am out, and the way he looks at me makes my skin crawl. I think he is afraid of you." "Good," Kane said. "He should be." They loaded the wagon together this time, Tabitha insisting she could carry the lighter items while Kane handled the heavy sacks. Working side by side, their hands occasionally brushed, sending small shocks of awareness through her system. She noticed things about him she had missed during their first meeting, the way he moved with a slight limp on his left side, favoring his right leg when he thought no one was watching. An old injury, perhaps, from the dangerous work of managing cattle and horses. "Will you take a glass of water before you head back?" Tabitha asked when the loading was complete. "It is a hot day for a long drive." Kane accepted, following her into the store's back room. It was a modest space, containing a narrow bed, a small table with 2 chairs, a pot-bellied stove, and a few shelves holding her meager personal possessions. Tabitha felt suddenly self-conscious about the humble surroundings, but Kane looked around with interest rather than judgment. "Cozy," he said, accepting the glass she poured from the pitcher she kept cool in the root cellar. "Do you live here alone?" "Since my father died," Tabitha said. "We used to have a house on Maple Street, but I had to sell it to pay some of the debts. This room came with the store, so it made sense to move in. It is not much, but it is mine." Kane took a long drink, and she found herself watching the movement of his throat as he swallowed. When he lowered the glass, his eyes met hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Tabitha," he said, using her first name for the first time. "Would it be forward of me to ask if I might call on you sometime? Not just for business, I mean." Her pulse quickened. "Call on me." Take you to dinner, maybe, Kane said, or for a walk if you prefer something simpler. I know I am just a ranch foreman, not much to offer a woman who runs her own business, but I would like the chance to know you better, if you are interested. Tabitha set down her own glass carefully, afraid her shaking hands might drop it. Just a ranch foreman. Kane, you paid off $700 of debt without blinking. You saved me from a situation I might not have escaped from. You have been nothing but kind and respectful. And yes, I would very much like to have dinner with you. The smile that spread across Kane's face transformed him, softening the hard lines and revealing a warmth that made her own heart feel lighter. Sunday evening. There is a restaurant that opened last month, supposed to have decent food. Or I could bring something from the ranch if you would prefer to eat somewhere quieter. The restaurant would be lovely, Tabitha said. I cannot remember the last time I went somewhere just for the pleasure of it. They agreed on a time, and Kane left with what seemed like reluctance, turning back twice to look at her, before finally climbing onto his wagon and heading north. Tabitha stood in the doorway watching until he disappeared from view, then pressed her hands to her flushed cheeks and allowed herself a moment of pure, uncomplicated happiness. Sunday arrived with the kind of perfect weather that Kansas produced on rare occasions, the heat tempered by a steady breeze and the sky an endless expanse of cloudless blue. Tabitha wore her best dress, a simple creation of deep green cotton that her father had bought her 2 Christmases ago. It was slightly out of fashion now, but she had kept it carefully stored and the color brought out the auburn highlights in her brown hair. Kane arrived promptly at 6 o'clock, wearing clean clothes and with his dark hair still damp from washing. He offered his arm with old-fashioned courtesy, and they walked together through Wilson's Main Street toward the restaurant. Tabitha was aware of curious glances from neighbors, of whispered conversations that would no doubt dissect every detail of this outing, but found she did not care. Let them talk. She was tired of living under the shadow of grief and debt and fear. The restaurant was busy with the Sunday dinner crowd, but Kane had reserved a table near the window. They ordered roasted chicken with potatoes and vegetables, and as they waited for their food, conversation flowed with surprising ease. Kane told her about growing up in Texas, about his father's death in a stampede when Kane was young, about his mother's struggles to keep the family together. She took in washing and mending, Kane said. Worked her fingers to the bone to keep me and my 2 sisters fed. When that debt collector came around, she did not have a choice. She paid what he demanded because she had children depending on her and no other way to keep a roof over our heads. What happened to her? Tabitha asked gently. She passed 6 years ago, Kane said. Heart just gave out, the doctor said. I think she was tired, worn down by all those years of hard living. My sisters are both married now, living in San Antonio with families of their own. I send them money when I can, make sure they never have to make the choices our mother made. Is that why you came to Kansas? Partly, Kane admitted. 3 Rivers offered good pay and a chance to build something. The owner, Samuel York, is getting old and has no children. He has hinted that if I prove myself, there might be an opportunity to buy into the ranch as a partner. It is more than I could have hoped for in Texas. Their food arrived, and they ate while Kane asked about her own history. Tabitha found herself opening up in ways she had not expected, telling him about her mother's death from cholera when Tabitha was just 8. About growing up helping her father in the store, about her dreams of expanding the business someday, maybe opening a second location or starting a mail-order catalog service. You have ambition, Kane observed. I like that. Too many people are content to just survive. You want to thrive. Is that wrong? Tabitha asked. Sometimes I worry that wanting more is ungrateful, that I should be satisfied with what I have. "There is nothing wrong with wanting to build a life you can be proud of," Kane said firmly. "Your father would want that for you. He would want you to take what he started and make it better, stronger." After dinner, they walked through the town square, past the courthouse and the small park where children played in the fading light. Kane told her stories about life at Three Rivers, about the eccentric characters who made up the ranch hands, about the challenges of managing cattle in drought conditions, and the satisfaction of seeing the herd thrive despite the difficulties. "Mr. Chen is teaching me to cook," Kane admitted. "Says a man who can only eat what someone else prepares is not truly independent. I am terrible at it, but he is patient." Tabitha laughed. "What have you learned to make?" "I can scramble eggs without burning them most of the time," Kane said with mock pride. "And I make a decent pot of coffee. Mr. Chen says I might master biscuits by the time I am 50 if I practice diligently." They returned to the mercantile as the sun set, painting the Kansas sky in shades of orange and gold. Kane walked her to the door, and for a moment they stood in the twilight, neither quite ready to say goodbye. "I had a wonderful evening," Tabitha said softly. "So did I," Kane replied. "Would you allow me to call on you again? I realize the ranch keeps me busy, but I could come into town next Saturday if you are free." "I would like that very much." Kane reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted, and took her hand in his. He raised it to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles that sent warmth flooding through her entire body. "Until Saturday, then," he said. "Good night, Tabitha." She watched him walk away into the darkness, his figure gradually disappearing, and knew with absolute certainty that her life had just changed in some fundamental way. She was falling for Kane Young, falling fast and hard, and the realization both thrilled and terrified her. The weeks that followed established a pattern that became the brightest part of Tabitha's existence. Kane came to town every Saturday without fail, sometimes staying for just a few hours, sometimes spending the entire day helping her with repairs around the store or escorting her to various social functions. They attended a barn dance at the Henderson farm, a church picnic, and a 4th of July celebration where Kane won the shooting contest and presented her with the blue ribbon as a prize. The physical attraction between them grew stronger with each meeting, a current of desire that ran beneath every conversation and casual touch. Kane was unfailingly respectful, never pushing beyond what was proper, but Tabitha found herself lying awake at night imagining what it would feel like to be held in his arms, to be kissed by him with real passion, rather than the chaste pecks on the cheek he allowed himself when saying goodbye. 3 months into their courtship, Vernon Crabtree made his presence known again. Tabitha was closing the store one evening in late September when he appeared in the doorway, his expression ugly with resentment. "Still playing house with your cowboy?" he asked, his words slightly slurred. He had been drinking, she realized with a spike of fear. "Mr. Crabtree, I am closed for the evening," Tabitha said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Please leave." "You think you are better than me," Vernon said, stumbling slightly as he moved into the store. "Think that foreman will marry you." "He is using you, girl. Men like that do not marry shopkeepers. They take what they want and move on." "Get out," Tabitha said more firmly. "You have no business here." Vernon laughed bitterly. "No business. I could have had this store had you. I offered you a way to keep your precious legacy, and you threw it in my face. For what? A cowboy who will forget your name as soon as he finds the next pretty face." He lurched toward her, and Tabitha grabbed the first thing her hand found, a heavy iron skillet hanging from a display hook. She swung it with all her strength, catching Vernon across the shoulder. He howled in pain and rage, but before he could retaliate, the door burst open and Kane was there, moving with frightening speed. Kane's fist connected with Vernon's jaw in a single, economical punch that sent the creditor sprawling across the floor. He stood over the fallen man, his body coiled and ready for further violence, and Tabitha had never seen him look so dangerous. "You have exactly 5 seconds to get up and walk out that door," Kane said, his voice like iron wrapped in silk. "If you ever come near Miss Hayes again, if you so much as look in her direction, I will make you regret the day you were born. Do you understand me?" Vernon scrambled to his feet, blood trickling from his split lip. "You cannot threaten me. I will have the law on you." "Please do," Kane said. "Sheriff Morrison is a friend of mine. I am sure he would be interested to hear about your habit of extorting vulnerable women. I would bet money you have done this before, and if I start asking around, I will find other victims. Do you really want me digging into your business practices?" Vernon's face went pale. Without another word, he fled into the night, and Tabitha heard his footsteps running down the street. Her legs suddenly felt weak, and she sat down hard on the nearest chair. Kane was beside her instantly, his anger transforming into concern. "Are you hurt? Did he touch you?" "I am fine," Tabitha said, though her hands were shaking. "You arrived just in time. How did you know to come?" "Tommy Porter saw Crabtree heading this way and came to find me at the hotel," Kane said. "I had been planning to surprise you with dinner, thought I would arrive early. Seems like good timing." Tabitha laughed shakily. "Very good timing." She looked up at him, at the worry in his storm-gray eyes, and something broke loose inside her chest. "Kane, I need to tell you something." "What is it?" "I love you," she said simply. "I know it has only been a few months, and maybe it is too soon to say such things, but I do. I love you, and I do not want to pretend otherwise anymore." For a moment, Kane just stared at her, and Tabitha felt a flutter of panic. Had she misread the situation? Was she about to embarrass herself completely? Then Kane was pulling her to her feet, his hands gentle on her arms, his face transformed by a smile so brilliant it took her breath away. "Too soon." "Tabitha, I have been in love with you since the first day I walked into this store and saw you standing up to that bastard with nothing but courage and dignity. I love your strength, your kindness, your determination. I love the way you laugh at my terrible cooking stories and the way you get excited about new inventory shipments. I love everything about you, and I have been trying to figure out the right time to tell you. Now seems like a good time," Tabitha whispered. Kane's kiss was everything she had imagined and more, tender and passionate and full of promise. His arms came around her, holding her close, and she melted into his embrace with a sense of coming home. They stood there in the dim light of the mercantile, surrounded by sacks of flour and bolts of fabric, and all the mundane trappings of daily commerce, and Tabitha thought she had never been anywhere more perfect. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Kane rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me," he said. "I know I should probably court you longer, should do this properly with flowers and a ring, but I cannot wait. Marry me, Tabitha. Let me spend the rest of my life making you happy." "Yes," she said without hesitation. "Yes, absolutely yes." They were married 6 weeks later in Wilson's small church, with half the town in attendance and Mr. Chen proudly standing up as Kane's best man. Tabitha wore a new dress of cream-colored silk, purchased with money from the mercantile's first truly profitable quarter, and carried wildflowers that Kane had picked himself that morning. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt, and when the minister pronounced them husband and wife, the kiss they shared drew cheers and applause from the assembled guests. Samuel York, the owner of 3 Rivers Ranch, attended the wedding and pulled Kane aside during the reception. Tabitha watched anxiously, hoping the older man was not displeased by Kane's marriage, But when they returned, both were smiling. "Mr. York has made me a generous offer," Kane told her later, as they prepared to leave for a brief honeymoon at a hotel in Abilene. "He wants to sell me a 20% stake in Three Rivers. Says he has been impressed with my work and wants to ensure the ranch stays in capable hands when he eventually retires." "Kane, that is wonderful," Tabitha said, "but can we afford it?" "With the money I have saved and the profits from your store, yes," Kane said. "It will be tight for a while, but York is giving me favorable terms. He says a man who would pay off another person's debts without expecting anything in return is the kind of partner he wants." They combined their resources and their lives, Kane moving into the rooms behind the mercantile while they saved money to build a proper house. Tabitha continued running the store with increased success, the Three Rivers contract serving as an anchor that allowed her to expand her inventory and her customer base. Kane worked long hours at the ranch but came home to her every night, and they spent their evenings planning their future, talking about dreams and possibilities. The first winter of their marriage was harsh, with heavy snows that closed roads and made travel difficult. But the mercantile stayed open, and Kane organized the ranch hands to help deliver supplies to families who could not make it to town. They became known as a couple who cared about their community, who worked hard and treated everyone fairly. In the spring of 1884, Tabitha discovered she was pregnant. The news filled her with joy and terror in equal measure. Her own mother had died young, and Tabitha had no female relatives nearby to guide her through the experience. But the women of Wilson rallied around her, offering advice and support, and Kane proved to be a devoted and attentive husband, his excitement about becoming a father evident in everything he did. Their son was born in December, arriving during a snowstorm that made it impossible for the doctor to reach them in time. Mr. Chen assisted with the delivery, his steady presence and calm instructions helping Kane and Tabitha through the frightening hours of labor. When the baby finally emerged, wailing lustily, Kane held him with shaking hands and tears streaming down his face. "He is perfect," Kane whispered. "Tabitha, we made something perfect." They named him Matthew Robert Young, honoring both Kane's father Matthew and Tabitha's father Robert. The baby was healthy and strong, with his father's dark hair and his mother's brown eyes. Caring for him while managing the store proved challenging, but Tabitha discovered she was capable of far more than she had imagined. Kane helped whenever he could, learning to change diapers and warm bottles with the same dedication he brought to ranch management. Samuel York's health declined slowly over the next 2 years, and he relied increasingly on Kane to handle the day-to-day operations of Three Rivers. When York passed away peacefully in his sleep in the spring of 1886, his will revealed that he had left the entire ranch to Kane, asking only that Kane continue to employ the long-time hands and maintain the operation's reputation for fair dealing. The inheritance transformed their lives overnight. Kane was now the owner of one of the most successful ranches in Kansas, and Tabitha found herself in the unexpected position of being a woman of considerable means. They built a beautiful house on a hill overlooking the ranch, with a separate building to house the mercantile's new location, and hired staff to help manage both operations. But wealth and success did not change the fundamental nature of who they were. Kane still worked alongside his ranch hands, still insisted on doing his share of the difficult and dirty work. Tabitha still opened the mercantile herself most mornings, still knew her regular customers by name and asked about their families. They taught Matthew the value of hard work and kindness, making sure he understood that their prosperity came from effort and integrity, rather than luck or entitlement. Vernon Crabtree left Wilson shortly after Kane and Tabitha's wedding, relocating to Topeka under circumstances that remained mysterious. Rumors suggested that Kane had indeed investigated the man's business practices and found evidence of fraud that would have resulted in criminal charges. Whatever the truth, his departure was celebrated quietly by several women in Wilson who had suffered under his predatory lending practices. On their 5th anniversary, Kane took Tabitha on a trip to San Antonio to visit his sisters. It was Tabitha's first time traveling by train, and she marveled at how quickly the landscape changed, from the flat prairies of Kansas to the rolling hills of Texas. Kane's sisters, Margaret and Ruth, welcomed her with genuine warmth, exclaiming over young Matthew and sharing embarrassing stories about Kane's childhood. "He was always the protective one," Margaret said over dinner at her home. When Ruth was being courted by that boy who turned out to be no good, Kane was the one who figured it out and warned her off. "He has always had good instincts about people." "He certainly changed my life," Tabitha said, smiling at her husband across the table. "I do not know what would have happened if he had not walked into my store that day." Kane reached for her hand, threading their fingers together. "I think you would have found a way. You are stronger than you know." "Maybe," Tabitha said, "but I am glad I did not have to find out. I am glad I found you instead." They returned to Kansas refreshed and ready to tackle new challenges. The ranch continued to prosper, and Tabitha expanded the mercantile again, adding a section for farm equipment and another for women's fashions. She hired 3 full-time employees, including Tommy Porter, who had grown into a reliable young man with a good head for business. Their daughter was born in 1888, a squalling bundle of energy they named Caroline Grace. Where Matthew had been a calm, easy baby, Caroline demanded constant attention and stimulation. She kept them exhausted and entertained in equal measure, and Kane proved to be just as devoted to his daughter as he was to his son. "You are spoiling her," Tabitha said one evening, watching as Kane rocked Caroline to sleep for the 3rd time that night. "Impossible," Kane replied, his voice soft so as not to wake the baby. "She is perfect. Perfect things cannot be spoiled." Tabitha smiled at the sight of her strong, capable husband cradling their tiny daughter with such tenderness. She thought back to that day in the mercantile, when she had been alone and afraid, facing a future that seemed to hold nothing but despair. Kane had walked into her life like an answer to a prayer she had been too proud to voice, and in the years since, he had proven over and over that his kindness on that first day was not an aberration but the truest expression of his character. They faced challenges, of course. There were years when drought threatened the ranch, when competition from larger stores threatened the mercantile's profitability, when illness swept through the household and left them all weak and frightened. But they faced each challenge together, their love and partnership stronger than any obstacle. Matthew grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved books and learning. Tabitha taught him herself until he was old enough to attend the school that Wilson had finally built in 1890. Caroline was his opposite, wild and adventurous, more likely to be found climbing trees or chasing chickens than sitting still with a book. Kane joked that she had inherited his restless spirit, while Matthew had gotten Tabitha's contemplative nature. In 1892, when Matthew was 7 and Caroline 4, Tabitha discovered she was pregnant again. This pregnancy proved more difficult than the previous 2, with persistent sickness that left her weak and unable to work for weeks at a time. Kane hired a manager for the mercantile and insisted that Tabitha rest, despite her protests that she was not an invalid. Their second son was born premature and small, arriving 6 weeks early during a summer thunderstorm. The doctor was pessimistic about his chances, but the baby surprised everyone by fighting his way through those first critical days. They named him Samuel Kane Young, honoring the man who had given Kane his opportunity and ensuring their son would always carry his father's name as well. Samuel was a quiet, gentle child, small for his age but quick-witted and observant. He developed a special bond with the ranch animals, showing a natural talent for working with horses that delighted Kane. By the time he was 5, Samuel could calm a skittish mare with nothing but his voice and his presence, a gift that seemed almost magical to those who witnessed it. The years flowed past, marked by the rhythms of ranch life and the changing seasons. Wilson grew from a struggling frontier town into a prosperous community with paved streets, electric lights, and a telegraph office. Tabitha served on the town council and helped establish Wilson's first lending library, making sure that books and education were available to everyone regardless of their ability to pay. Kane became one of the most respected ranchers in Kansas, known for his fair treatment of workers and his willingness to help neighbors in need. He never forgot what it was like to watch his mother struggle, to feel powerless in the face of injustice, and he made sure that anyone who worked for him received fair wages and decent living conditions. Matthew attended college in Kansas City, studying business and economics before returning to Wilson to help his mother expand the mercantile into a chain of 3 stores spanning 2 counties. Caroline shocked everyone by announcing at 16 that she wanted to be a veterinarian, and despite the raised eyebrows from those who thought such ambitions unseemly for a woman, Kane and Tabitha supported her dream. She attended veterinary school in Illinois, one of the first women to do so, and returned to establish a successful practice in Wilson. Samuel took over management of the ranch when Kane decided to step back at age 55. His old leg injury finally forcing him to admit he could not do the physical work as easily as he once had. Under Samuel's guidance, the ranch adapted to new techniques and technologies, becoming a model operation that other ranchers studied and emulated. On their 25th anniversary, Kane surprised Tabitha with a trip to San Francisco, a journey she had dreamed of since childhood but never expected to take. They traveled by train across the entire country, watching as the landscape transformed from prairie to mountain to ocean. They stayed in a grand hotel, dined in elegant restaurants, and walked along the beach holding hands like newlyweds. "You ever regret it?" Kane asked one evening as they watched the sun set over the Pacific. "Tying yourself to a cowboy instead of finding someone more suitable?" Tabitha turned to look at him, at the silver threading through his dark hair, at the lines the sun and wind had carved into his face, at the eyes that still looked at her with the same intensity they had shown that first day in the mercantile. "Regret it? Kane, you saved me. Not just from Vernon Crabtree and his threats, but from a life of loneliness and fear. You gave me love, gave me a family, gave me the courage to become more than I thought I could be. I could never regret that, not for a single moment." Kane pulled her close, kissing her with the passion of a much younger man. "I love you, Tabitha Young. I loved you then, I love you now, and I will love you until my last breath." They returned to Wilson refreshed and more in love than ever, ready to face whatever years remained to them. Their children gave them grandchildren, beautiful babies who filled the big house with noise and laughter. Matthew's wife, Sarah, bore twins, a boy and a girl. Caroline remained unmarried but seemed perfectly content with her veterinary practice and her collection of rescue animals. Samuel married Rosa, the daughter of a neighboring rancher, and they had 4 children in quick succession, turning the ranch house into a place of joyful chaos. On a crisp autumn day in 1912, Kane and Tabitha sat on the porch of their home, watching their grandchildren play in the yard below. Kane was 70 now, his hair completely white, his movements slower and more deliberate. Tabitha was 65, her own hair silver, her hands marked by decades of hard work. But they still held hands, still found excuses to touch and kiss, still looked at each other with eyes that saw not age but the accumulation of shared years and memories. "You remember the day we met?" Tabitha asked, watching as young Samuel Jr. tried to teach his sister how to lasso a fence post. "Every detail," Kane said. "I remember thinking you were the bravest person I had ever seen, standing up to Crabtree with nothing but determination and dignity. I remember wanting to help you, needing to help you in a way I did not entirely understand." "I was terrified," Tabitha admitted. "Terrified of him, terrified of what would happen to me if I lost the store. Then you walked in and everything changed. You gave me back my future." "We gave each other a future," Kane corrected gently. "I was just drifting before I met you, Tabitha. Working hard but with no real purpose beyond survival. You gave me something to work for, something to build. You made me want to be better, to do better." Tabitha leaned her head on his shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of him, the steady beat of his heart. "I love you, Kane Young. Thank you for walking into my store that day. Thank you for seeing something worth saving." "Thank you for letting me save you," Kane replied. "And for saving me right back." They sat together as the sun set over the Kansas prairie, surrounded by the life they had built from nothing but courage and love and determination. The mercantile still stood in Wilson, now run by Matthew and his twins. The ranch still prospered under Samuel's capable management. Caroline's veterinary practice was thriving, her reputation extending far beyond Wilson's borders. Everything they had fought for, everything they had built together, continued to flourish. And at the center of it all was the love between a cowboy who had refused to let injustice stand, and a woman who had found the strength to accept help when she needed it most. Kane passed away peacefully in his sleep 5 years later, his hand in Tabitha's, surrounded by his children and grandchildren. Tabitha mourned him deeply, but took comfort in the legacy they had created together, in the family they had raised, in the difference they had made in countless lives through their kindness and generosity. She lived another 8 years, remaining active and engaged with the community until the very end. When she died at age 78, the entire town of Wilson turned out for her funeral, people traveling from miles around to pay their respects to a woman who had embodied the best qualities of the frontier spirit: resilience, compassion, and unwavering integrity. They buried her next to Kane on the hill, overlooking Three Rivers Ranch, under a sky as wide and blue as the one that had witnessed their first meeting. And if love could transcend death, if spirit could linger in the places where joy had flourished, then they were together still, watching over the family they had created, the legacy they had built, and the love story that had begun with a simple act of kindness in a mercantile on a hot summer day in Wilson, Kansas, in 1883.